I'll try and frame this talk. It needs a bit of organising to make sense, so hopefully I'll get it in the right order. It's quite a simple idea I want to present, but it's complicated to put forward. It's really about paradox, although it won't start off about paradox on the basis that life is paradoxical, but most of us try and pin it down to one side or the other, We try and make it one thing or the other, rather than live the paradox. But I'll talk about that later. I wanted to start by saying, and I think it must be the experience that we all have, that when we start practice, or we become, or we make a decision to be more aware of ourselves, that we're very quickly confronted by or become aware of all our conditioning. Not all of it, but we do quickly recognise that we are conditioned and that we do act out of ways of being that are kind of embedded in us, a part of root and branch parts of our being, almost a cellular level, it seems sometimes. They're so hardwired. But we do, most of us anyway, act often out of the tendencies that have been created by the conditioning of our life, and what we're born with as well. And when we become aware of those tendencies, sometimes they're unconscious. And every time we're aware of them, we're also become aware that every time we operate or our behaviour is determined by them, we kind of reinforce them. So there's a definite reinforcement process, and as you get older, the more you get stuck in your own groove, the more difficult it is to get out of it. And the more frustrated and irritated you can become with yourself, because it seems there's nowhere to go with this groove that you're in. How the hell do you get out of it? Am I going to take it to my grave, And one of our, this is the difficulty, one of our immediate responses is to start to struggle with our conditioning, with our tendencies, with the way we behave. And we, by an act of will, almost, we think we can overcome and negate the constrictions on us that keep us from being free. And I say free on purpose, but in quotation marks. And then we discover that, in fact, the struggle to be free of these things can actually harden the habit. And we also discover that the self, the idea of me, itself feels strengthened if it has something in itself to fight against. So, in the fighting, it's a bit like, I think, is it cobwebs? The more you fight, the more you get stuck, So what you do? How do you escape this catch-22? And then the thing that then comes up is to surrender to it. And then, of course, what happens is, as soon as we have this idea of surrendering to it, part of us starts to feel a bit useless. Suddenly, one of our raison d'etres in life, which is to improve and get better, is taken away from us because we're going to surrender to what we're like. And so that again causes worry and problems. Because who are we going to be if we just surrender to life? Does that mean that we can't change, we can't improve, we can't become better people? Of course it doesn't. When we surrender, it doesn't mean that we're trying to bail out of life, that we're trying to escape it. More the opposite, really. More that we are fully immersing ourselves in our life and discovering within that we can be free. So, the paradox then comes up. How do we become free if in the effort to become free we get more stuck? And we refer back to Dogen quite a lot in this circumstance, but he kind of, summed up the dilemma. If we are already perfect, why do we need to practice? If we're already inherently, intrinsically, unavoidably Buddha nature, why do we need to do anything? And so the paradox then comes up about, well, why'd you practice? I mean, why are we here? Why don't we just kind of get on with it, So I've listed a few paradoxes that we all try and avoid or try and land on one side of. And the first one, of course, is there's the relative side of our lives in which there's suffering. And we all know there's suffering, we suffer ourselves, we see other people suffering. We're stuck in a dualistic world in which there's good and bad, right and wrong. There's pain and there's pleasure. So that's our usual modus operandi. We're usually there. And then we also have this other idea that on the other side there's emptiness. There's the and in the experience of emptiness or of non-duality, we realise the perfection of imperfection. We realise that in fact we can have an experience that despite all this suffering, despite all the imperfections we see around us, we also realise that in fact this is perfect. So we've got two contradictions going on, We've got over here, we've got the relative, over here we've got emptiness, and we want to be on either side. And in fact, reality isn't on either side. Reality is those two embraced and lived simultaneously, which sounds to the rational mind really impossible. Like Genpo Roshi used to say that it's two sides of one coin. One side is the relative and the other side is the emptiness. But it's all one coin, and we want to be on one side. And then the other side is, the other paradox that comes up for us is we've got a deep sense of self. It feels real. I am me, you are you. Why would we dispute that that's the case? And yet, in this tradition, and we also talk about no self. And so another paradox arises. We think that we either have to be totally identified with the self, or we have to drop the self and experience selflessness. And that's just another paradox. We don't have to do, it's not an either or. And then the one that interests me the most is that we, because we imagine we're limited or we're constricted in our behaviour, and we then immediately posit or create the idea of freedom. So we've now got this other paradox: we're limited, and over here is freedom. The freedom, of course, the idea of freedom only exists because we, to begin with, thought that we weren't free. If we didn't have the view that we weren't free, then the idea of freedom wouldn't arise. So there's another paradox that we've created for ourselves that we can be trapped in. And of course, these paradoxes arise often in physics. I mean, I'm not an astrophysicist, but I know for sure that these paradoxes arise with, an electron can be in two places at once, for sure. An electron here can spin, and an electron that was paired with it thousands of miles away will simultaneously spin with it when it changes. It's like magic, not even the speed of light. It just happens simultaneously. And of course, the old wave argument, the old light argument, is light a wave or a particle? It can be measured as either, but in fact it's neither. So, the paradox is essentially part of being alive, and yet what we most want to do, or seem to want to do, is we want to pin it down and stay on one side. And can you do that? You can't do it because it doesn't reflect reality, because reality doesn't experience paradox. Reality just is. The birds sing, the sun comes up, the moon rises, the moon goes down. We get upset. We get happy. We get born, we die. The whole thing just rolls. It doesn't, in itself, it doesn't have contradiction. So it's really interesting. I think it's really interesting. The whole thing is interesting. So, how do we practice? What do we do? Yeah. So, Dogen, in a way, saw, and a lot of Dogen's writing, is, from my understanding, is about that, in fact, from a big mind or a great mind or no mind perspective, yours and mine self-deception is just as valid as Joe Bloggs' wisdom. I mean, it's all part of the same game, if you like, or deal, or it's all just this. And so, that's why we talk about enlightenment and delusion and enlightenment. They're not that different. I mean, if you can completely embrace the fact that you're deluded, then you're fine. If you completely embrace the fact that you're enlightened, you're fine. If you can completely embrace the fact that you're neither, you're fine. The problem comes is not embracing anything, but finding it all kind of unsatisfactory and needing to be fixed. Talking myself out of a job now. So Dogen's written a huge amount about why it's valuable to practice. But today I was thinking that, not as interesting, it's not as sophisticated, and I'm sure not as wise as Dogen, but finally, practice for me is a bit like, when you start off doing something. You might start doing yoga because you want to stretch more or be calmer, or you might start running because you want to get fit. But finally, when you've been doing it for a while, you just do it because that's what you do. You like to do it, And practice can become the same thing. It doesn't necessarily have to have a raison d'etre, a target. It can be you just practice. What do you think? Anybody got any?
Well, it definitely feels sometimes like that for me.
Pardon?
It definitely feels like that sometimes for me, that I sometimes sit and think, why?
Yeah.
Why am I doing it?
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't know.
No. And it's a great question to keep asking as well. Why do I practice? It's a really good question. Because as soon as you stop asking the question, you kind of already become a Zen couch potato. You need to keep asking the question. Yeah.
I found the surrendering to the moment constant work in progress.
Yeah.
Particularly when the moment's not satisfactory to me.
Yeah. I can I say that into the mic because it's really good. The surrendering to the moment is a work in progress.
Yeah.
I think that Alan, that's true for us all.
And because it brings up fear.
Yeah.
That feeling of groundlessness.
Yeah. What will happen?
Yeah. What's going to happen?
Will I be held?
It's the ego dying. but in a kind of in a kind of frightening way. Because like you said, I can relate to people dying.
It's like, when you stand and somebody's behind you and you just fall backwards and they catch you.
Yeah.
And if you really let yourself go and you trust them, you can almost reach the ground before they get you. But it's still scary to do. But I think it's true for all of us. We've all experienced the fact that when we do, you certainly read about it, that when you do let go, the universe is there, holding you up, strangely.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you can only do it. You can't let go in a conditioned way, like a pretend way, on the basis that if it doesn't catch you, you'll still be okay. You can get your balance back. It doesn't work that way. You've really got to let go. You know.
I think it's because we get attached. Well, I do, or we do, and we get attached to outcomes.
Yeah, sure.
And, we're taught that from a young age at school that if we work hard enough and if we do A, B, C, we will achieve that. Life doesn't work that way. And
but it's also true as well, isn't it? You know, it can work. It can work, yeah.
But that's the non-attachment to results.
Yeah.
So the result might not always be our goal, yeah. But it's like say the mind, if it thinks about something enough, a result, it's almost like it'll get it. But it's like I think about winning the lottery every week, but it doesn't happen. It's the same kind of logic.
You're not thinking hard enough.
It's the same principle.
Sure it is, yeah. It is. Thank you.
Isn't the danger or the pitfall, at least for me, that you might realise the struggle is the problem, that you need to surrender, so then you start struggling to surrender.
Yeah, that's right. It's a knife edge. It's a knife edge. We have to be...
Surrender today.
Yeah. We have to keep an eye on ourselves all the time. But, who'd we rather keep an eye on than ourselves? I mean, it's fun, isn't it? We can give ourselves so much attention.
Sensei, I think what you said about the self, the experience of self, despite everything that is said about it, or anyone says about it, the experience of self is very real.
Yeah.
So the concept of no self is very, very threatening.
Yeah.
But it's I forgot what I was going to say. It's easier to sort of accept that it's a sort of a condition of the mind. That the notion that this self is separate from everything else.
Yeah.
That's the flaw in it. Not denying that there's an experience of self. It would seem.
Well, the whole of Buddhism seems to be based on the fact that the Buddha saw that most of us are stuck on this side of the balance, the small self side, the identification with just me and with the separation from the rest of the universe. So, from that perspective, he focused it on no self. But we'd all been stuck in self. I mean, we'd all been stuck in emptiness. The Buddha may have come along and thought, you guys, you need to develop an ego. This is not good enough. You're stuck over here. Get some individuality. Get some ego going. But we all want to be. We don't want to be flexible and move around because it's a bit scary. I don't know whether he would have said that.
I was going to say, you could have said that. I hope not. Have you got time just to expand a little bit on the freedom bit you said? Because that caught my attention.
Yeah. If we don't have the concept that we're trapped, we don't need the concept that we can be free.
I really like this.
So we create the idea of freedom by initially creating the idea that we're trapped. But what is freedom? I suspect that animals don't. An animal in the wild doesn't either feel trapped or free. It just does its thing. Yeah.
Mm.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is the case. I mean, I don't, it's just you and I could have been banging our heads on the wall for years. No reason. If the whole scenario is true, it's quite funny, really, isn't it? Don't you think it's funny? Sorry, no, maybe you don't. It kind of tickles me, the strangeness of it. Shakespeare had it absolutely right, didn't he? The whole world's a stage, and we are mere. Okay, thank you.